Yes, we're live in Facebook, also live on Zoom. And we have a wonderful talk now. This is the 9th session of the Progressive Vaishnava conference this weekend. We had 4 sessions on Friday, 4 sessions yesterday. Please go and check those out if you weren't able to attend live. They're all on Facebook, on the Progressive Vaishnava Facebook page. And today we also have this wonderful session with Radhamadhav. So you can see on the screen, the title of this session is Family Life and Sexuality in the Life of a Vaishnav. The topics that have been chosen for this seminar series are, as you can see from this one and many others, really important topics that many of us, think about, talk about, maybe privately, but there's not always too much of a forum for these things to be discussed. So it's particularly great. I think it's one of the main strengths of this conference is the chance for these things to be discussed by people who are really well versed in them and can share their ideas with us. So I'm going to introduce you in a moment to Radhamadhav. I'm going to just give you a little bit of a rundown on the format for this session. It is going to be a total of up to 90 minutes. Radhamadhav will speak for probably about 40 minutes. I'll be making notes and I'm sure I'll have lots of questions. But if you have any questions, I'd like you to put them in the chat here in Zoom to me, and I'll field them. And if you're on Facebook and you have any comments and questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll make sure to be checking and bringing them in here as well at the right time. So I'm just going to first do a little intro for Radhamadhav, so you have a sort of a sense of his background, and then I'll pass it over to him. So Radhamadhav, he was born in Switzerland, but he's been living in India, mostly in Vrindavan, for the last 17 years. He's currently staying in Radhakund, and he has his wife and daughter. And he's been serving in various temples and projects in ISKCON and the Gaudiya Math over the years. And he's also working with a reforesting NGO in Vrindavan as well. He works as a researcher, an author, a teacher, and a yoga tour guide. And he's published a number of books, including Unity and Diversity, Imlital Mahatmya, and Perfect Imperfection. I love that, Perfect Imperfection. He studied environmental science, and he's also done his PhD in philosophy. And he has a great website, which you should check out. He's going to be referring to it in a little bit, called Nectar Pot. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Radhamadhav. I want you to give, even though he won't hear you, I want you to give him a big, warm welcome. Thank you, Radhamadhav, for being here, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Raviji, for the wonderful, heartfelt introduction. So nice that you're moderating, and all of you, welcome for this session today. I'll be just doing a brief invocation of bliss of mercy at the end, then I'll get right into it. So I'll be speaking about the first part, about family, and then in the second part, I'll be taking a little bit more time about sexuality, because that's really the part that many devotees are having a lot of issues with and need reconciliation. So as Ravi already said, if you have any questions, please let us know through the chat and the comment section, and we'll try to answer as much as possible here, if not later. And yeah, without further ado, I'll start with the invocation and then with the main part. Thank you again for joining us. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagradatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam Namo Vishnu Padaya Shri Gaura Priyamte Shri Mate Bhakti Vallabh Tirtha Goswami Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadahmayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vande Nanda Brajastrinam Padarenu Ya Sangharikatodgita Punate Bhuvanakaya Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namo Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Welcome everybody to today's talk. We have been asked by our friends to speak today on the topic of family and sexuality in the life of a Vaishnava in this Progressive Vaishnavism's first conference out of the box. And it's a pleasure for me to be here today. Out of the box means that sometimes we are asked to step out of the comfort zone and make certain adjustments in our lives that are unexpected. And they're a great challenge in our lives. But if we have the association of like-minded devotees, and that's really one of the most important parts in bhakti, then that makes things a lot easier. And that's why we're here, to share each other's experiences and to try to make it easier for each other. My Guru Maharaj used to say that one aspect of kirtan is to also open your mind in front of others, to like when you do kirtan, especially in the association of devotees, then others hear you and they also hear your mistakes, and that gives you a chance to be corrected and a chance to be heard. And so it's important for us to really open up our minds to others, not just to be corrected, but also to be encouraged, and so that others can also pray for us, shower us with their blessings. Oftentimes nowadays, where we have different circumstances where it's difficult for us to connect with each other, speak about segregation, of society, family, whatnot. In the COVID situation, we all saw how difficult it can get when you are not able to physically meet. It becomes more and more important for us to actually make extra endeavors to meet. And it might be over virtual space, like we're doing this meeting now over virtual space. But even so, it is a great opportunity for us to exchange ourselves with others for many, many reasons. And often we have a tendency to keep things in our heart. I also have that tendency sometimes and not opening up to others. But really, if we want to progress swiftly in this bhakti, in this progression of continuing to, sublimate to have a more sublime consciousness, then it's very important that we do open up our hearts. So this is also an opportunity for me to open up my heart to all of you. And if you have any feedback to me, I'm always very much open to do that. If you think that some things should be adjusted or corrected, do let me know. I very much appreciate that. And I'm not claiming that everything I say here is perfect or the absolute truth. I'm a very limited person. I have my drawbacks. And so, yeah, please keep the conversation alive inside of you and also with your friends and family. we are continuing our progress, and all of us make certain mistakes, and we should not, stay there, but we should progress from the standpoint where we are right now, and also we should learn from the previous mistakes. That's what progress is all about, right? We should not be shy also to make mistakes. Sometimes one reason why we don't progress is that we're shy to make mistakes, because it's so comfortable in the box, because it seems that in the box you don't make any mistakes, but sometimes exactly that's the mistake. And for your development, maybe it's exactly required to step outside of that box with certain risks. And it may look to yourself also and to others that you're doing a mistake by stepping out of the box, and your heart start to palpitate, and it's a very daring effort. It's very much challenging, but really sometimes, and more often than not often, that's really what's required. So I want to encourage everyone to also step outside of their boxes. I'm not here to just be the only person or an example. We have so many other wonderful Vaishnavas speaking on this panel, and I'm just one of many, many. But really, at the end of the day, all of us have to do that for ourselves. I'm just doing my little part here, and I hope that you will bless me so that I can progress and I can learn from my mistakes and the mistakes of others, and so that we can really, have better approaches to certain things that need adjustments in our lives. And that's really what the talks are all about here in this Progressive Vaishnavism's wonderful platform, is that this platform gives us a chance to really transform as many things as we feel like need to be transformed, without, of course, changing the essence. That's a big challenge. And I always invoke the picture of a river. The river, a natural river, keeps on meandering. So it keeps on actually changing its external form, but it always carries the essence of the same water. So similarly, to be progressive doesn't mean to change the essence, doesn't change the water of the river, but it means to really adjust at each moment to the changing circumstances and keep on meandering in your life. And if you close your eyes for some times and open them up again, it can be that you don't recognize the same river anymore. I mean, for those of you who have made Ganga Yatra, if you see the Ganga in the Himalayas, if you see her, in Varanasi and then in Navadvip, they seem to be, three completely different rivers, but they're not. They're the same river. They just, the embankments keep on changing because the river meanders and keeps on changing. And so similarly, sometimes it seems, if you jump out from the time scale, that, wow, there's a huge change in someone's person's form of devotion or external appearance. But really, that person's inner essence continues to be the same. It's just an external manifestation that is adapting to certain circumstances. And those circumstances may not be even seen externally. They may be his inner circumstances, because we're not even the mind, right? And the mind inside keeps on changing. So we all have to even adapt to our own internal changing circumstances. That's also an important part of what it means, to be progressive in Vaishnavism. So first we'll be speaking about family. And I want to encourage everyone who is from the beginning in the householder ashram, or whoever has changed also in the householder ashram, to be very much happy. I mean, most of us are really, really happy. But I know that for some, it's maybe been a little bit of a disappointment because many of us started off as brahmacharis, especially those who were born in the movement, or those who spent a lot of time in the brahmachari ashram. And most of us at least have done that mentally, or are trying to do that mentally to be brahmacharis. We should be, in a sense, we should all be eternal brahmacharis, just like Krishna himself says. He says that I'm an eternal brahmachari. In that sense, in the sense that we all should be searching for the divine essence, for Brahma, all the time, and be detached from what is not the essence. But I'm also talking about the ashram, right? So people may have been disappointed with themselves or with others when they changed the ashram. And I want to give a little bit of a different perspective here today. That is also interesting to see. I find it very eye-opening, and I find it very beautiful at the same time. And that's what I'm here to share for you today. And that is that in one perspective, the householder ashram gives you more opportunity to grow spiritually, not just in one, in many, many aspects. But in one sense, I want to say, in one sense, of course, we have the traditional view that if possible, stay brahmachari, don't get married, etc. But from another perspective, it can really be much bigger advantage for you to be a householder. And I'm going to speak about some of those aspects now before I speak about sexuality, the second part of this talk. So what happened in my life is that I became a householder due to various circumstances. I'm not going to speak about all of those today, but some of those were also in regards to some research I did, in which I found out for my own sake, from my own perspective, that in some ways, it really is of a greater benefit for most people, I would say, to be in the householder ashram for many, many reasons. I'll be speaking about some of them today. And so I changed into the householder ashram in a very conscious way. And some other parts of that change were also a little bit unexpected. And I was very much surprised in another sense when I became a householder, because certain things I didn't expect. Just to give a little background, I was serving as a brahmachari for like 17 days, or 17 years or more, sorry. And my mind was really fully fixed in that blueprint of life. I wasn't planning to get married or anything. And so I was planning to be a brahmachari for my entire life. It was quite natural for me. I didn't have much difficulties. Like most people actually face difficulties. And I come back to that. It's my opinion right now that actually it's more natural that if you have difficulties as a brahmacharya, because it goes so much against the nature of life, of human life. You're much more in sync with human life if you do face difficulties. But for certain reasons that I may talk about later, I didn't face those difficulties, just to give a little background. And then when I became a householder, I was positively surprised about the dynamics. Of course, not everything in householder life is, just eating chocolate cake and rainbows. I don't want to give a false impression. Everything has its challenge, and definitely there are many challenges in this ashram. But I just want to speak about a few things that really took me by surprise, how spiritually uplifting it really is, and incomparably uplifting in the sense that certain aspects of the householder ashram really cannot be cannot be exchanged, or cannot be, you cannot make up for it otherwise, even in a virtual way, something that is unique to it. And that also is reflected in the eternal spiritual world. So because, of course, Krishna is, in a householder setting, in a typical traditional Vedic setting, where you have the family, as the core aspect of your social life. And practically everyone is a householder. So, and also in our spiritual forms, most of us will be householders, especially if you aspire for, the traditional directions of the Gaudiya Vaishnava acharyas. And, most of them in their Swarupa are gopis or manjaris, where some are also sakhas, or, whatever they have their preference in their Swarupa. But most of us will be householders. All of these different essential aspects of Swarupas, they're all householders eternally. And the same in Gaur Leela, really. Most of the Gaur Parishads are also householders. So that's something that is there in eternity, but once it's reflected here in the material world, most of us still have the impression that it's a second choice to the first choice of brahmacharya for many reasons. Now, something that I was surprised about, I want to share here. When I entered into that mood of a householder, is the mystic aspects of householder life or family life. And I think that's very, very much underrated in our tradition and in all the big world religions. If you talk about Abrahamism or other big world religions, then usually they don't emphasize that a lot, the mystic aspects of family life. But you have that's very much highlighted by the native religions or by the nature religions, where you have, wonderful passages of rites. For example, in my life, what really struck me was when I became a father, then it was a really mystical experience that was beyond my expectation. Because, in the traditional way, you prepare for the child. It's not just, the Garbhadan Sanskar, but it's the entire process of preparing mentally to welcome that soul and to attract the prayers, to attract the blessings by intense prayers, so that you'll be able to serve that soul, so that soul can progress spiritually as much as possible. And really, what happened in my case was that there were a lot of mystic dynamics that I was completely unaware of as a brahmachari when I entered into household ashram. And that is really beyond words. I'm still, struggling to find the right words to express that. Everyone has to really experience that for him or herself. But what it really comes down to is that it's a feeling of tribe, and tribe, not just in a very, primitive, in quote unquote sense, but in a very mystic sense, that we're all related to each other through various tribes. And, just like you have these different two approaches to Swarupa, whether it's inherited or whether there is some kind of amount of choice. Similarly, the same dynamics is there in your tribe dynamics. Certain things may be fixed, and you may be unable to escape that part of your tribe responsibilities. If you want to use the word dharma, you can use the word dharma, but I'm just trying to be more on the English side of the language, so it's easier to understand. But different words will, shell out different aspects of the different important realities that we speak about. So dharma is also important word here. And some aspects of your tribe collective you may choose. And those dynamics always play together. And how that plays together is really mystic. You know, it's not just whom you meet, who's gonna, be your spouse, who's gonna be your children, but you really feel connection with entire generations of families that you are now connecting to and that you connect by choice. So, of course, we have the tradition of parampara, and we all know the mystic dynamics of connecting to that family. But it's just been a very surprising mystic experience for me when I became a father, that this feeling of tribe, of being really grounded in a deep connection with people around me as human beings. And it revealed to me a lot of the solid mystics that, we always talk about the different family relations that we have in the spiritual world, but really to get to the basics of it and to really taste it in a direct experience, in a directly way of experiences, is so much more realistic on the ground, the bare ground of human life. And so, yeah, like you see, I'm still struggling with the proper words, but I want to encourage everyone who didn't have these kind of experiences to, go deeper into the roots of the mystic aspects of family life. And how that can be done is really by welcoming them. Yeah. So, for example, when you go through an important passage in your life, for example, when you become a father, then really, feel into your soul and feel all the changes that are now happening in your mind and in your body. It's a deeply mystic experience. And you need to take time for that, to not just to process that, but even more important, to cherish it, right? So, I mean, what's so special about having a live Zoom meeting compared to, listening or seeing it on YouTube? It's much more convenient in a sense to watch it on YouTube because you can just do it while you cook or whenever you have time to do it. But you want to be there when it happens. You want to cherish it when it happens, right? And so similarly, if you want to be open to the deeply mystic dynamics in your life, you have to be live, you have to be here and now. You have to, open your antennas, so to say, and dive deeper into these amazing revelations, because every moment, every second really is a mystic revelation if you but have the eyes to it. And so it's not something about being learned and reading a lot or even hearing a lot. It's something about just being in tune with nature, with your own nature, with the universal nature, with Radha Krishna in all their gazillions of various unlimited, amazing manifestations, and not being too much boxed into your ways of thinking. Because if you are, basically you're saying, I'm only receiving this frequency and nothing else, right? But if you are actually in a reality that's not in that box right now, and you're supposed to be receiving something that's here and not here, then basically you're not in tune with your own dharma. And so it's really important to just let go completely. It's also, that's actually an aspect of detachment, or you want to call it renunciation in a positive sense, that, you have to be detached from the externalities of time and space and just be here now. And cherish that, relish it. Yeah, in the Gaudiya terms of philosophy or psychology is the rasa svadana. That's really the key to going deeper into the mystic stuff of life right now, right here, is to be able to, at each point and moment in each circumstance, to cherish and relish the different tastes of reality, rasam, yeah, to be able to relish that. And so for you, in order for you to do that, you have to be able to really go deep. And so the household of ashram, it gives you the wonderful opportunity to root yourself with Mother Earth, with the tribe. You know, when I speak about tribe, I don't just mean your family in the sense of your biological mother and father and the biological mother and father of your spouse and, you know, the closer clan, so to say, of your earthly family. But it's really a universal family, the divine family, the sublime family of especially, you know, sublime people, seekers of the sublime essence of life. And so the householder ashram for me really gave me a very, very deep rooting or earthing, some call it also earthing, into that reality of tribe consciousness. I know it sounds funny, but for some, it may sound like something it's really hard to relate to. But really, if you have a tinge of, you know, and eine Ahnung in German, you know, if you have some kind of perception of what this could be about in your subconsciousness, perhaps, or in your heart, then just follow up on that, you know, and you may hear it like some kind of slight tune, and that tune becomes bigger and bigger and fills your heart, the space of your heart. But really, it's been a wonderful experience. And when I connect, for example, with that living being that comes to me in the womb, you know, of my wife, it's not just, of course, that experience in itself is already amazing. The way you connect, you start to connect to someone you've maybe perhaps never met before. And it's a wonderful journey of meeting and, you know, really connecting in ways that, you know, you've never done before. And you feel that love between each other growing and budding. But that's not just that relationship between you and that spirit soul. And that's really where it becomes very mystic. If you can experience that yourself, it's mind blowing. That relationship of you and your child carries with itself so many unlimited relationships that, you know, you have with everyone in this wonderful creation of God. And right now, God sends you exactly this relationship for you to learn exactly what you need to learn right now. So don't take it as something unimportant or not essential. Everything is right there. And all the things that you learned before are now relating to exactly that thing that you're doing to serve that wonderful soul who's coming to your life. Or if you're not having children, the same thing goes in your relationship to your spouse. And really what is so valuable about the householder ashram is the deep sense of intimacy you have with your family members. And that deep sense is often, unfortunately, not there at all, or not really deep so much with, you know, people in the renounced orders, because there is this Aishwarya, or there is this opulence of, okay, you're serving a sannyasi, Dandavat Pranam, and he's there on a high chair, and you're, you know, serving with so much awe and reverence, and you know, the entire structure of reverence it should not actually, it should do the opposite, should bring you closer, but most of the time it doesn't. It brings you more further away. So it creates a gap. And I'm not saying that that's what the tradition teaches, right? The tradition teaches to be very intimate with your Gurudev. In most cases, our spiritual masters are renounced. And so although they are renounced and although they are actually in a position of authority, that shouldn't bar you from having an intimate connection with them. And rather, it's even mentioned, Vishrambhena Guru Seva. This is so important. Vishrambhena Guru Seva means that you should have service with your Guru, an experience of service with your Guru right now, right here, and throughout your entire life, without any gap of awe and reverence, but very, very intimately. Not even just like a friend, not even just like, a best friend, but someone who you're so close with that, you're almost, in a sense, you're almost one soul. That's how the relationship between, Radha and Krishna is described. They're almost one soul. They are one soul in two forms. But the intimacy really has to become so much that it's really hard in normal words to describe it. It's really a mystic experience. And so, unfortunately, that often is lacking in the brahmacharya ashram or sannyasa ashram or whatever other, renounced ashrams there are, the vanaprastha ashrams, etc. But in the householder ashram, really, you're kind of forced, and a lot of us need to be forced into intimacy, because another aspect or another reason why we are not intimate with devotees or renounced devotees or whatever is because we're lazy, right? Why lazy? Because it's so much easier not to be intimate. It's so much easier to hide in our, snail shells, not to crawl out of them, not to be intimate, because really intimate means also to open up, to be naked in front of others. But when we step out of the comfort zone, so to say, and when we allow intimacy to happen, people say that when you step out of the comfort zone, that's when the magic happens, or the magic doesn't happen in your comfort zone. You need to step out of it. And so that's exactly the mood and spirit of this conference, is that stepping out of the comfort zone comes with so many advantages. And so one big blessing of the householder ashram is that you are forced into intimacy. Because householder ashram doesn't work without intimacy. It becomes bland and stale, and things start to disintegrate very fast. And you have to be there. You have to be there for the other. You have to be there anytime, not just, anytime, but all the times. In the middle of the night, when your baby is crying, anytime when you're doing some important work, but your wife is more important. And you have to open yourself up for that, and you have to be there. You have to step into that role, that new role you are being given now. And so that really is a big blessing, that intimacy that you're now being forced into, because then spiritually a lot of things open up. It's really important, of course, to know about our Tattva Siddhanta, to do our Gaudiya Vaishnava sadhanas, etc. But if you're lacking on the dynamics of intimacy, then it really cannot fructify, because Vrindavan consciousness is the consciousness of the deepest intimacy. And therefore, unless we learn that, we have to come back again to learn it in so many ways we can learn it, and so householder ashram is a very great opportunity for us to learn intimacy and connection. So yeah, when I'm speaking about tribe, it's really all about connection, heart connection, mystic connections, heart deep connections. That's the big opportunity we have here.
Right,
Yes.
Such a so nice. I have quite a few questions, and we've seen a couple of questions in. Is it okay if we take a couple of questions on this part, and then
yes,
before you transition on to the next part? Is that okay?
Perfect. I'm concluding now with these last words on my first part, and then I'll speak about the second part. Perfect. Yes, please go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. I've got a couple of questions which I'll come to in a moment from the audience, but I just had a few thoughts. So I absolutely loved how you started it up, an opportunity to open up our hearts. I heard a great quote once that being vulnerable feels very weak on the inside, but it actually looks very strong on the outside. So actually, it can feel very vulnerable, but it is a great opportunity to connect. And I loved my experience of family life is that especially it's almost, in a strange way, it's almost better when there are challenges. And I don't mean challenges as in like things that you really don't like, but just joint challenges that you have to go through, things that happen in life, because it's a really great opportunity to, well, either you break or it's a great opportunity to go deeper. And actually, because it sort of feels like a family life is a place to learn to love, like to really love, like, because it can be hard at times, especially if you have children and they go through challenges and whatever it might be. And I feel like with having children, they're out in the world and they have to put on the brave face and do all the things. And then sometimes at home, that's the only place maybe that they can really show their fears and worries and concerns. And so in a way, sometimes in a family life setting, we see the best in people, but we also see the worst in them, because that's like somewhere where they can, where else have they got to kind of really show their worries and everything. So I think that's, for me, an amazing thing, like that. If we can learn to accept and love the people in our family, even when we see their worst, that's such an important building block for them to then be strong and go out and do great things potentially as well. You know what I mean? It's like, where else can any of us do that?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's so important to be seen in your weakness, because that opens up the heart space much more than being seen when you're strong. Because like you're saying, vulnerability from the outside looks like strength, not like weakness. Because really, when you're being held by your community, and that's what I was talking about before when I said tribe, when you feel that you are being held by your tribe in love, in unconditional love, and that's when you're weak, right? Then the heart space opens up much more and you can spiritually blossom much more. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ravi. It's very beautiful. Yes.
Pleasure. And I just had one other funny thing that came to mind. So there was a boss I was also a brahmachari for not as long as your 17 days.
Yeah, that's very long.
17 years. So I was only 7 years. But I also I'll come back to that. Like the thing that people ask you when you tell them you were a monk, they first ask you, why did you become a monk? But what they really want to ask you is, why did you stop becoming a monk or stop being a monk? And so that's interesting. But my boss, when I started to work, I remember he was from an Indian background, a lovely man. And he said to me at one point, I can actually see Krishna. I feel like I experience Krishna in my son. And interestingly, at the time, just shows you how I thought to myself, that's so bogus. But actually, I realize now, having children, that it is a huge opportunity to see the magic and Krishna, in everything, but especially in those really magical relationships, that are there in the family. So I appreciate you bringing that to the fore. I'm going to take some questions now from the Facebook page. So one is, do you think that dealing with these controversial topics will come from the top down or bottom up, i.e., persons recognizing the unspoken problems on the ground and discussing in trusted groups, which I presume is what we're doing here. I also think that what we are experiencing may be similar to some things that are being discussed in the Catholic Church, like divorce, contraception, premarital sex, etc. So two parts to that, really. I think, do you want to have a go at answering that one?
Sure. Thank you for the question. It rarely, in my personal experience, comes from the top down, because usually the structure of the society that we're living in whichever traditional framework you're living, they're very hierarchical. And in a hierarchical system, the main mood is to keep up the status quo. The main mood is that of conservation and not that of reform. So if something is there that has a dynamic of reform, it's often seen as heresy, and that is mostly not possible in the upper parts of the structure of societies. But it really mostly comes from the grassroots. It comes from simple people, so to say, like myself or other people are out there to who are in a sense stupid enough to stick out their heads because the lawnmower is going to come and you cut their heads off. But there is a price you have to pay for sticking your head out. I mean, of course, I do face criticism, and it's not always just nice. And it does take courage. And to come back to your question, to the possible question that someone might have, it's more important to ask, why did you stop being a monk? And so one reason that in the many dynamics that played out for me of changing into the householder ashram was so that I could speak up about these topics, so that I could be honest to myself in public and not just in front of the mirror, in my silent chamber, so that I could actually embody who I feel I am right now, right here in public as well. And so there's another big chance of the householder ashram, because really it gives you a bigger dynamic of being able to speak up. Yeah, so good question. And I do feel it comes from the grassroots.
Yeah, nice answer. And actually, I have another question just come in here from Sardiya Rasa, which I'll take in a moment. But it kind of ties in with something I was thinking. So I loved how you mentioned, be here now, really lean in and embrace this part of your life. And there's so much to be learned there. And I just wrote down this word like no regrets, because there's a component, however much the percentage is, that we encounter in spiritual communities where it's kind of like either, oh, it's not the same now as it was in the 60s, or, oh, now I'm in householder life. It's if only I could have stayed in brahmachari. So it's always putting the power somewhere else. It's like basically defeating yourself. Like it's almost like, your game is already over, right? There's nothing. Yeah. So it's not even constructive. There's nothing to be gained in thinking like that. So I really loved, that like you're in this situation now, however you got there, whatever the reasons. So actually, embrace it. It's like every moment is magical to be alive, and like this is where you are. So accept it. So, but this question from Sardiya, maybe you can tie in her question with what I've just said. So, if this is the case, then why do we see such a strong emphasis on the value, and in brackets, and purity of the brahmachari and sannyas ashram in ISKCON? How can we create more appreciation and respect for all the ashrams?
Thank you, Sardiya. This is a very important question that I also asked myself a lot, and I've done a lot of research in this topic. And for me, the most eye-opening part was when I, discovered a lot of things that happened way down the line in history, which, I am not able to really talk about here in the talk because we're not having enough time. But I'll be sharing a link later on, and you kindly, follow up that link, and there you can find more on this topic. But basically, to be here in the present and in the moment is not just something for the householders. It's something for all the ashrams, right? It's just often so that in the renounced ashrams, you have a tendency to want to be somewhere else because of that very sense of renunciation. And that's not what renunciation is actually meant for. Renunciation is actually meant for you to be more present. And so your renunciation should be dealing with the things that, are distracting you from your sadhana, but it should not have that mood. For example, Ravi, like you were saying, that I am, that I'm sad about who I am right now because I missed so many chances, or I wasn't there with Prabhupada or with that acharya or this acharya. And, there's a lot of time a sense of false humility also when we are simply too lazy, I'm talking about myself, right? Too lazy to really cherish that wonderful gift we've been given right here, right now, because with every second of life, exactly what we need is being revealed to us right now, right here. And there's nothing that we miss out, really, in that sense, if you're but open to it. Like there's this wonderful shloka in the Bhagavatam I like a lot, Tatenu kampang susamikshamana punjana evatma pritan vipakam, etc., etc. So you have to be really seeing with very, very open eyes, not just open eyes. Samikshamana means with beautiful eyes. Samikshamana with extra emphasis and extra being here and not somewhere else, and sharing your entire being and heart. So then when you do that, only when you do that, when you really look with your entire being, love and entire honesty and vulnerability, like we were saying before, Ravi, such importance should be also given to vulnerability and, being honest to yourself and others, naked in that sense, not having so many filters. Then what happens is the magic that you realize that, you become, in the Sanskrit term, the inheritance of all the nectar of all your ancestors, of all your tribes that you're connected with, spiritual, material, whatever, you're actually right now inheriting the essence of every spiritual tradition that makes sense to you, that is important for you right now. But it requires that openness. And so that, for me, it was a really big surprise when I entered Householder Ashram, how mystical dimensions opened up, and mystical dimensions I was not aware of before. So in my personal experience, it really is something next level, that people, and now to your question, back to your question, Saradia, why we are not taught these aspects and why we have so much emphasis on the renounced aspects of life is, in my humble understanding, I may be completely wrong, but in terms of history, 2,500 years ago, roughly, there was a huge revolution in India with the rise of the Shramanas. And the Shramanas, they rose in opposition to the Brahmanas, right? So what we have right now today is the synthesis of, a lot of unlimited cultures, but mainly the two major cultures that have been synthesized over these thousands of years are the culture of the Brahmanas, which are actually fully householder oriented, right? In the Brahmana culture, it is essential that you have not just children, but a son. I know that's, there's a downside to, there's some parts of it that are not so essential, but really they believed those days that the son is, you have to have a male, follow-up person in your family that then does the Shraddh ceremony, because the daughter could not be doing the Shraddh ceremony, you had to have a son. And then you get mukti, then you attain svarga. So that's why, so the entire concept was such that you were forced to have a family. And who knows, what was first, the hen or the egg? Whether someone, great sage, had realized that actually family life gives you more opportunity, therefore let's make the narrative so as to support family life, or whether it was the other way around. But the Brahminical culture those days, and that's lost for most of us, we're not aware of that anymore, but please do a little bit of research. It really was that way. study the Vedas and the ancient texts, it was anti-renunciation for this reason. They did not welcome renunciation at all because they had a huge sense of tribe, and all the mystic revelations were encoded into that tribe consciousness. And so everything has, pros and cons. But then what happened, the Shramanas opposed the corruption that came within that consciousness, namely what we also hear of when we hear about the teachings of Lord Buddha, because Buddha basically was a Shramana, and then he started, creating his own religion, the Buddhism, religion. So what happened was the Shramanas then rose in opposition because certain things the Brahmanas started to monopolize. For example, it was really the way, if you don't believe, then you do your research, but really normal people were not allowed to study the Vedas. That was really a historical fact. And otherwise, why would anybody have to oppose that if it wasn't like that, right? It really was a historical fact. And so that was not the only thing, but mainly the Shramanas rose in opposition to that. And of course, the slaughtering of the animals. But then they went to the other extreme. They said, okay, that doesn't work, so let's be renunciates. And they went into the extreme, aspects of renunciation. And so when we inherited that renunciation centrism from the Shramanas, then we became what we are today. So really, historically speaking, we are so much focused on renunciation that according to Indology, you can ask an Indologist, the Bhakti tradition is not accepted as a Brahminical tradition, but as a Shramanical tradition. I was shocked when I learned about that, but really it goes a far way to show who we really are in terms of our inheritance, of our inheritance of values, and that those values, they have changed over time. And so I find it very eye-opening when we realize that, hey, it wasn't always like that. Okay, during the early periods of Vedic civilization, all of us were householders. And, if you want to connect to that tribe, I'm not saying you have to, but for the sake of experiment, let's identify with the Brahminical tradition. We were all household people, and we did not like people to come and preach to us about renunciation and that's the better way. No way. We did not like it. And we encoded all our values in family life, and that had its own set of values. So yes, it's a big topic. Please also follow up on the link I'll be sharing to get more information. But it doesn't have to be that way. History tells us it was changing, and whoever has a beautiful vision into the future can probably tell that it will be changing as well in the future. Yes.
Thank
you.
Yes,
Raviji, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Radhamadhav. Just before we segue into this next section, just a couple of things. You mentioned a moment ago, you sort of said, when we're vulnerable, sometimes we can sort of feel naked. And I think it was Padmanabh Swami, he has a nice quote. He says, don't fake it till you make it, naked till you make it. It's kind of like,
right.
be transparent and, be vulnerable. And
I love that one.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah. And then the question earlier about is it top down or bottom up, which you answered nicely, was from Shirvan Ramjit, and he just replied, "I love that. The management is more geared to maintaining the status quo as opposed to reform," which is obviously a good observation. And as you highlighted, and Yogeshwara Prabhu the other day on Friday, he said something similar, that actually oftentimes we have the conservative elements trying to preserve, tradition and history and everything. But actually, if you look back throughout our tradition, just as you've said, there are so many social reformers, whether it was Bhaktivinoda Thakur or Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they were often going against the status quo, and it's something you mentioned at the very beginning, which I loved, which is true in any field, really. We should not be shy to make mistakes, because often that is the only way we will make the progress, even if we get it wrong, but we can correct, but if we're not experimenting, we're just standing still, right?
Beautiful. Yes.
Yeah. And then we have one more question, or it's kind of more of a comment, but it's an interesting comment from Shirvan Ramjit also. He says, an observation I've made over the years is that at the beginning of our spiritual journeys, we accept the kind of ideal, and we're presented with the ideal. But sometimes what's not shared really is the vast gulf of difference that often exists between the ideal and the reality of the struggles that people experience while practicing. So there's a kind of a disconnect,
Yes, very true. That disconnect is real, and that's what distinguishes people who have a lot of deep empathy for others from those who don't have it. And unfortunately, empathy is not so much taught in our circles, although we are actually followers of the most empathic Lord. Lord Chaitanya is Krishna, who is, totally immersed in empathy with Radharani. And that's his Swarupa, his essential form. He's the very Lord of empathy, but we are still lacking a lot in empathy. But, people who really experience you, or, the person sitting opposite you with deep empathy, is able to go through all those filters of what I am thinking, the other person is supposed to be like, to fit into my box or into the box of my institution or whatnot, and to actually just accept that person as that person is right now. So then I'll be able to connect to the heart of that person and actually cater to that person's needs, and not just to try to trim that person, the way that I think that person should be trimmed to fit in the box. But, very true. There is often a gap. And I think empathy and compassion really are very, very great skill sets that are able to fill that gap. And we should very much make more endeavors to learn and teach these values. Yes.
Thank you. And I remember sitting with, in Mayapur, I don't remember which one of them it was, Jananivas or Pankaj, and they said to me, I don't know the context of how we were discussing it, but they said, that it's really important to just accept people as they are, on that point that you've just made. Like, not like just you're not going to change it. That's who they are. And if you want to have a relationship with them, then you can only really have an honest relationship when you accept them as they are.
Yes.
In response to the renunciation question, Taruni Dasi has said, Dandavats, in response to the renunciation question, Mahaprabhu set the example. And we have one more question before we move to the next section. So Nityananda Das has said, do you think that cerebral narcissism is a risk in the celibate ashram? And somatic...
Can you repeat that? What is a risk? I didn't get that part.
No problem. I'll say again. So it's a little bit of a detailed question. So do you think that, I think cerebral narcissism, I think meaning the brain, is a risk in the celibate ashram, and somatic narcissism, maybe to do with the senses, for householders? And how do we become aware and heal? So two types of possible narcissism. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Well, definitely. What you're saying is there in a sense of a tendency. I wouldn't want to say that, there are a very prominent risk in the sense that, it happens to most of us. I hope not. But I do experience that, there is always a tendency to narcissism in our times, because overall we're living in a society that is tending towards narcissism as a collective. And so you always get influenced by that. Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha, Krishna says in the Gita, according to your association, you will develop a certain set of desires or a certain set of psychological inclinations, which Kama is all about on a psychological level. And so, yes, in the renunciate ashram, you have a lot of sense of abstraction, a lot of sense of, being there in the mind as per, being in the body, because that's just the way the framework works. And yes, there is a tendency to become toxic. And yes, if you become toxic, I hope not, but if it happens, then there is a pitfall of what you were, talking about, cerebral narcissism, definitely. And we do have to look out for that, and we do have to heal it in its early stages. And the same, of course, is there for the household or ashram. You could potentially, fall slightly or fully into the pitfall of somatic narcissism, because after all, the senses can be a distraction. And if you allow them to distract you, they probably will. So yes, but there is ways, and that's why it's so important to reach out to the community. In the community, you can really learn to avoid those pitfalls. And so again, at the end of the day, it's all about association with especially like-minded devotees. Yes, thank you for the question.
Yeah, and just one more, just a short comment from Nityananda Das before we move to the next section. It's a very it's a good quote. It says, "Tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance." So when you make something, I guess, more just black and white or simplified, it's a type of tyranny, not allowing for the nuance.
It's a type of
tyranny, like
tyranny,
tyranny, like a tyrant.
Okay, like a tyrant. Okay,
yeah, tyranny. It's like a type of control or a sort of a control, sort of an abuse, I suppose, in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
Tyranny is when you remove that.
When you deliberately remove all nuance.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes,
it's a tendency towards fascism. Everything should be the same in the sense that according to your ideals, and yeah, there definitely is tendency in hierarchical structures towards that, and we have to look out for those. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to pass back to you now for this next section. We're sort of, we could go over a little bit, but we have about 23 minutes left roughly. So just to give you a bit of a guideline, but if you want to go into the next section, please do.
Sure. I'll go into it for some time, and then again, we'll open up the space for questions. Yes?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when we talk about sexuality as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, then often we don't have a space for that because it's a taboo topic as within most of our societies, and it takes a lot of bravery for us to talk about it with our close friends, what to speak of talking about it in public. And, don't think that it's very easy for me, for example, to just speak about this in public. It always takes extra courage to do so. And especially because it's a controversial topic, and especially because the way I present it, in my viewpoint is not fitting very well into the box. It's quite out of the box. I hope it's not going to be out of the box after a few generations. For now, it definitely is, and it definitely ruffles feathers. But I'm encouraged, and I want to emphasize that I'm encouraged by like-minded devotees. And thank you, all of you out there, for being there at the back, holding your blessed hands on my back and tapping on my shoulders and telling me I'm not the only one. And so that's why again and again, I want to come back to that most important core value of association, especially like-minded association. And I want to emphasize it right now, actually, not just in a conclusion, that make sure if you don't have like-minded association, pray for it very, very intensely. And within no time, whatever that means, but, often so much faster than you expected, Krishna will send you like-minded association. I didn't have anyone to exchange myself on this topic. Obviously, in the brahmachari ashram, usually I don't speak about this topic with so many people or anyone at all. But then when this became a topic for me, Krishna really sent amazing people to me unexpectedly, in a sense that I didn't expect them to just walk into my life like that, but they really physically knocked on my door and they were really heaven sent. And so, yes, if you have like-minded friends, it makes things a million times easier. And I guess I wouldn't be having these wonderful conversations with devotees here if I wouldn't have that wonderful support of like-minded devotees. So that's also one thing I want to emphasize here. It's, not just me and my personal opinion, but really what I'm speaking about now here in public is not just my own realization or experience, but it's a collective of like-minded, Eros-friendly Vaishnavas. I like to use the word Eros, by the way, because it's less carrying the negative connotations that sexuality or sex carries with it. Because one important thing in this topic of sexuality is that we shouldn't think that it's just a religion who has put a lot of negative energy into this topic, but also, the non-religious spheres in life have put a big shade on sexuality and have dragged it down into toxic realms a lot. And so I think it really, there's a toxic relationship with Eros from both sides, the religious side as well as the secular side. And really, it requires, our relationship with Eros requires healings from all aspects of life. And so in that very chaotic dynamic, it's really important to just be open-minded and to be ready to learn from everyone. Because frankly speaking, from one perspective, be it religious or not religious, or whatever you want to call it, spiritual or traditional, from one perspective alone, according to my humble understanding, you really cannot get to the entire big picture. You need to really put it together like a puzzle. You need to add so many experiences into it. And that's another, to go back to the previous topic of family life, that's a big, big advantage of being a family person, that you have much bigger opportunities to embody the entire variety of life, in so many ways, and connect to so many people in so many ways that you wouldn't be able to do as a renounced person. And also to be very frank about that. Yeah. So you can easily say, okay, now I'm in a phase of experimentation and I embody that. I want to embody that. And that's totally okay as a householder, but it's not so much so as a renounced person. And so, yeah, like-minded association is very, very much needed in this taboo topic. Otherwise, you don't want to feel really, naked in front of a big audience of people that you cannot connect to on any friendly level, right? You need to have at least some heartfelt, deep connections that are there with deep empathy and with deep loving sentiments for you to be able to open up, right? And that's also a big topic in sexuality. Again, like I was emphasizing intimacy in the previous topic of family, I want to emphasize that as well when we talk about sexuality, because really sexuality in its essence is very much about intimacy. Yeah, it's about opening up to someone you love, and it's about a deeper connection. It's about creating a deeper connection that was never there before, and the body and the sense and state can act as a means for that. And all the entire dynamics of sexuality, they can create a platform for you to be able to do that. And most of us are unable, to really open up to someone in other ways. So for them, it becomes really, in a sense, an easy way to actually learn that. So for some, it's about learning about intimacy. For others, and I want to emphasize that because already someone was, mentioning premarital sex and or non-procreational sex. That's a big topic, right? So, sexuality, according to most of us human beings, is not just about creating children, but it's so much more. Okay, it's definitely not just about sense gratification. Okay, that's what the traditional stance on sexuality is, that if it's not for creating children, it's just about sense gratification. But it's really much more than just that. For example, it's about bonding, okay, in a relationship. It's one of many ways how you can bond, how you can create a much deeper relationship. For example, if you have experienced this, then you know very well that if you have been sexually intimate with someone, you have a much deeper bonding. Yeah. And I'm not saying that you have to do that with everyone in order to reach intimacy, but it's one of the many ways. Okay. With others, it's going for a walk. With others, it's having a talk. Okay. But that going for a walk served its purpose of creating intimacy. That going for sharing a herbal tea together, drinking a herbal tea together served that purpose. And exactly the same purpose can very easily be served by sexuality. Yeah. For example, okay, it has so much more aspects to it that most of us are not discussing. For example, healing. Okay, sexuality is an amazing tool for healing. It can heal traumata. It can heal scars in your life that you were not even aware of. Okay, if you are sharing the space with your partner, with your wife or husband, in a way that actually is very, very loving and holding, and is full of empathy, and is done in a way of healing. Okay, then oftentimes what happens is, the other. Okay, usually it's like that. One is more the placeholder, and the other one is more the person who's becoming healed. Can be both at the same time, but that rarely happens. So what happens that if you allow that dynamic to happen, the other person can spontaneously start to cry and have a spontaneous healing. Okay, because sexual energy is a creative energy, it's the original creative energy. And if you allow that to open up and heal yourself or your beloved, it actually does. It will, because sexuality is, if you so want, it's the archetype expression of love. Of course, our tradition emphasizes the potential of perversion, or corruption of the sexual energy in the material realm. Yes, we have to look out for that. But if you know how to look out for that, and we should do, then you can avoid it. And then you can tap into all its wonderful benefits, okay? And those benefits are unending. I'm just talking about a few examples, okay? There are many aspects that I myself have never experienced, and that others are, experiencing much more. But I'm just, very much concerned for us to know and to also recognize that sexuality is in itself an entire universe that most of us have not even, seen half of, right? Including myself. I don't want to exclude myself. I don't want to, come across as an expert in that. Not at all. I'm not an expert. I'm just a humble observant of a tiny, tiny little spectrum of whatever Krishna allows me to perceive in this huge universe of sexuality. But really, it's so much important that we let go of all the prejudices we have and learn more, open up more to, like, you were saying, Raviji, before, that other people, they mostly won't change. And unless we are able to connect to them, then we just, filter them out of reality and are unable to learn. And so here, the same thing applies with sexuality. If you really want to learn what it is for itself without the prejudices of our tradition, you have to connect to others. You have to, be able to learn from them, because to collect all these experiences yourself in one lifetime is very unprobable, very unlikely, especially as a devotee, where where you have so much little time denoted for sexuality. So it becomes very much valuable to hear of the experiences of others. And And so, yes, there's a plethora of experience and knowledge that we need to connect with before we even start to talk about sexuality in a way that makes sense for us humans. So I want to emphasize like-minded association and being open for the experience of others here to start with, and giving it back to you, Raviji, for now.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. I just want to read out a comment from D. Wilinda. She says, really appreciate your courage to discuss this issue in such a candid way. And it ties into something I loved what you said, and I could really feel it when you said it. Thank you for being here behind my back, tapping me on the shoulder, making me realize I'm not the only one. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but it brought to my mind that song by John Lennon, Imagine. One of the most powerful lines in that, every time it gets me, is when he says, you may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. It's such a powerful line, because it kind of gives us that strength, as we go out on this adventure of life, that, it's so important that, like you say, we really do need, as much as we may be a little bit or a lot strong ourselves, however strong we are, it's like in the wind, it's very difficult if you're on your own, to remain strong despite any storm. But by having that, like you say, like-minded association, I love that you said to pray for it. I think, and it's nice to hear in your life that you did, and it came to you, which is fantastic. I'll just say a few things which I thought were interesting. So I loved you said about sexuality is really about intimacy and a deeper sense of connection. Now, what I find an irony, my experience of this, so like I said, I spent my 7 years, as a brahmachari, is that the irony is that this sexual energy is such a powerful thing. And so you can't ignore it. You ignore it at your own peril, right? And so the irony is that in trying to be, better, and aspiring for this pure level that we're aspiring for, sometimes you could find yourself actually, maybe in a worse situation with, in your relationship with sexuality than you would have been if you were just kind of level and balanced. So it's almost like it becomes, if you try to repress it too much and you're not finding these healthy ways, like you're saying, to embrace it and to explore it and to deal with it, it's like a thing. You squash it down here, it will come out here. You squash it down here, it will pop out here. You can't. How is it possible? So I just find that that's such an irony, for us on this path, and equally. Often what we preach, so in many of our experience, we'll have heard, that, sex is a dirty thing, a nasty thing, exploitative, selfish, it's a fallen thing. So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You tell people enough that that's what it is, and then that's what it is for them. It's essentially, we have to understand that that's also a programming. That's just someone else's programming, and that's someone telling you that, and you accept it. And then you carry the shame of that and the all of the baggage of that, And so I think it has caused so much difficulty in devotees' relationships, because you have devotees who get married, and obviously it works both ways. But one way could be that you have like a lady who's married, and her husband won't even touch her, and he can't, so even though he may have good reasons and be thinking, oh, I'm trying to do this, that, and the other, easy for her to just think that he thinks she's something awful or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And so actually so much misunderstanding can happen there, and actually just such a mess, because we're not really discussing these things honestly. You know what I mean?
Very true. Yes. Thank you for sharing that, Ravi. It's a very, very, complex topic, and that's also why I'm going to share a page later where people can start to go deeper into certain aspects that I share there, and can keep the discussion alive, so to say, and do more research on it. Because really, if you touch on one aspect, you have to then speak about so many other aspects, and each of these aspects can be highly confusing because there's so much taboo involved, and there's so much stigma involved. And people are unable to filter out really what's relevant for them right now, right here. And so if you really want to be here with, your partner right here, right now, and accept what really is of value for you right now. You have to be able to filter out everything else and be here and have these eyes of sumikshamana and be really, really fully trusting that whatever Krishna is sending you right now, right here, is perfectly beneficial for you. And it has everything in it that you need to for you to flourish right now, right here. And so, yeah, it's an irony, like you're saying, Raviji, that we preach so much about how sexuality is dirty, and oftentimes then reality shows the mirror back to us, and then we see that, oh my God, I'm not better, I'm actually worse, and my relationship, especially with Eros, is so toxic, and I don't even know how to heal it. I don't even know to whom to reach out to heal my toxic relationship with Eros. I don't even know where to start, if I'm honest. And so it's so important that we are honest about that, vulnerable about it. And even if we don't know where to, place our next step with our foot, we have to at least open up our hearts. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're not claiming that we know everything perfectly, but we're opening up the rounds for discussions that make deeper sense for everyone involved and that bring healing.
Yeah, and thank you so much. Like I say, all of the topics on this Progressive Vaishnava conference out of the box are each of them in their own different ways are so relevant to devotees who are, obviously want to be devotees and want to practice this path, but also having so many questions, I guess, who just want to be real and honest about the things that, face us. And so thank you so much for, doing that work, and that's the fascinating thing. Often we do this work, whatever our work is, mainly to help ourselves because we need it, and then hopefully it can also be so helpful for other people. So I think that's the case with what you're sharing. I really very much appreciate it. I have two questions I want to come to. We're coming up sort of to the 90 minutes, so we can go maybe another 10 minutes, but I just wanted to, before we share your webpage, I love the reframing of this topic, but by language. Language is very powerful, and it has, like I say, it carries centuries of baggage, with it. So even just as you were sharing that, I was reflecting on how it was making me feel. So for me, when I think of the word sex, it can carry a lot of shame. It suggests that it's something selfish. It suggests also that it's like an act. Whereas when you use the word eros, this is just me personally, it suggested more of a shared experience, suggested something that exists not only inside us, but also it's like has its own independent existence outside of us. And equally, like almost kind of like an energetic field that we could kind of like, tune into. And so even just from that word, I was imagining a completely different thing, So just before we go to your webpage, which I think is going to be a great resource for people, just want to bring in these two questions if I could. So Saradia Rasa has a question. Where does the tendency in Vaishnava commentary to demonize sexuality come from? And why is there so much fear and anxiety surrounding it?
Thank you, Saradia, for this very important question. And I guess this question is relevant to all of us. And I also asked myself this question a lot. And like I was saying before, according to my humble understanding, it really all started 2,700 years ago, approximately. That was when the Shramanas in India, they started having huge amounts of influence. At the beginning, if you don't believe me that the Shramanas and Brahmanas were actually really much having sort of like a huge fight, then you can understand it from the famous Sanskrit grammarian Patanjali. He was one of the founding, most important Sanskrit grammarians of his days. And he lived in those days when the Shramanas started to really have a huge influence after the time of Lord Buddha, which is, roughly 2,500 years ago. He lived after that time, but in that period of that transition. So he said he used it to compound Brahmana Shramana as a compound that delineates or embodies opposition a fighting spirit, and he compared it to that of the snake and the mongoose. And the snake and the mongoose in the Indian lore are arch enemies, archetypical enemies. Yes. So like you would say in our language, cats and dogs in the English language. And so those days, really, there was a huge fight, a huge playoff, you can say, between the Brahmanas and the Shramanas. And in many senses, the Shramanas won that fight because they fought against the hypocrisy of the Brahminical culture that tried to monopolize everything and tried to exclude other castes from that monopoly. And it wasn't just a caste system, but it was the slaughtering of animals they opposed. They brought in ahimsa in a way that we know of it today. A lot of it was brought in by the Shramanas, but also the pendulum swayed to the other extreme from, extreme focus on family of the Brahmanas those days. The pendulum then with the Shramanas, swung to the extreme other opposite of extreme renunciation. Now, those days, the Shramanas were really extreme in their renunciation. And when those values were incorporated into the body of ethos of Indian traditions, they stayed. And they're there till today. And we are all inheritants of that Shramana luggage, if you want to use a negative term, because it's not just all roses. we inherited some good things, but we inherited a lot of luggage also. And so body unfriendliness, family unfriendliness, and eros unfriendliness is luggage that we carry till date from those early days where we started in India to incorporate the Shramanical or, the renunciate values into our ethos. And so I don't want to point fingers and blame others because we're all a big family learning from everyone and everyone's mistakes. But for us to make a better, beginning now and for us to heal, it's important that we look back because the healing has to start here. Often so we feel tension here on the neck, right? And the neck is really where the past sits, where the feeling of guilt and shame sits. By the way, there is a healer in Switzerland who can actually see when you have toxic relationships with certain things in your life. And he was asked how he perceived the devotees. And he said, well, they have beautiful shining energy at these 12 points. I don't know what you guys are doing at these 12 points where we apply tilak, but, it's beautifully shining. And so my friend insisted that he says something about the other aspects that are not so nice. And so he said, yeah, you guys, you have very bad energy here because you have a lot of feelings of guilt and shame. And your Svadhisthana chakra, the sexual chakra, for most of you guys, is really blocked up. There's a big mess there because of artificial repression. And so it goes a long way to show really where we are. And it's not just, that we are able to actually, so to say, succeed in our sublimation of sexual desires. According to my humble opinion, it's not required because it's nature that makes sense to us and we shouldn't go against that nature. That's just my humble own realization. But in order for, us to be giving justice to that, please refer to the webpage because right now, if I explain it won't make sense in that short amount of time. But to come back to your question, Saradia, it's in really important for us to look back without any bias of our tradition that tells us it's been always the same in our tradition. There was never any intermingling with other tradition. It's been like that for 5,000 years. And really look into it unbiased. And then we can see, okay, what are our actual historical roots and start healing from there. And for me, that was a big part of my personal healing and a big part of my being able to breathe in and breathe out and, accept the way we are today in a positive way and start a fresh beginning with a lot of wonderful experiences of healing involved. Thank you for that question.
Wonderful. Thank you. I love that because it's very easy for us to take a character in history, whether it's, Bhaktisiddhanta or whoever, anyone, and kind of just think that they exist in isolation. What you've just shared is like that everything from the past has a knock-on effect at something else, to something else, to something else. And looking at history like this, I think we like to, our idealistic side likes to think, yeah, that's just the rules for everyone else, like that, but we somehow can jump above all of that, just, and sort of plug straight in with some complete, divine thing and take it in isolation. And my inclination is to lean more towards what you're describing. I know that I did a Prince 2 qualification in project management once, and one of the things that they talked about on massive projects is that there's so many documents that need to be created, and the most valuable document that they say that is created in a massive project, it could be called like a 20-50 million pound development, is the lessons learned, like what went wrong, how did it get fixed, what. But the thing that they also shared was, when someone takes on a similar project, they never read that document from the last project. Now, they should. Obviously, it's the most valuable, useful document.
Right.
Most people are like, no, we're going to do it our way, and we're going to just see it the way we want to see it. And I think that's sort of ties in with what you're saying. So before we go to the website, I think Vijay Krishna, who's actually in here in Zoom, he would like to come on and actually say his question to you, if that's okay. So Vijay, if you're there.
Yes, please.
Yeah, just that's it. Yeah, here he is.
Yes, Ravi Prabhu, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you, Vijay Krishna. Please speak.
Yes, my question is based on 2 of the shlokas chanted by Krishna in his Bhagavad Gita to Arjun about sex. And the first one is, quote, "I am the strength of the strong, devoid of passion and desire. I am sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles. O Lord of the Bharatas," Arjun. And this is from Knowledge of the Absolute, the 7th chapter. But and then at the 17th chapter, the divisions of faith, Lord Krishna mentions about the austerities of the body. And here it goes, the shloka. Quote, "Austerity of the body consists in worship of the Supreme Lord, the Brahmanas, the spiritual master, and superiors like the father and mother, and in cleanliness, simplicity, celibacy, and non-violence." So based on these 2 shlokas, my exact question is Lord Krishna contradicting himself by speaking these 2 shlokas? Because in the first one, he's saying that I am sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles. And then in the second one, he's recommending what? Celibacy.
Yes.
So, I'm totally confused.
Yes.
Thank you for
Vijay Krishna, thank you so much for your question. And yes, Krishna, the wonderful thing about the Bhagavad Gita is that it's so rich in topics. So Krishna speaks often from different perspectives about different topics. And when you look at it isolated or even in context, it often seems a little bit controversial. But really, he is not contradicting himself, because when he says that, he is sex life that is not in contradiction to the principles of Dharma, what he means is that he talks about sex life that is spiritually aligned. So that means that it's not just done for your own sake, but it's done for a higher purpose. The ways that, traditional Orthodox Gaudiya Vaishnavas has phrased that is that you create Krishna conscious children, right? But if you ask me, it can also be extended to other purposes of which I was talking before. That's just my own humble opinion. But the whole point is that it should be uplifting, right? And so what is the purpose of brahmacharya is exactly the same. Brahmacharya is supposed to lift you up spiritually. It's not in itself any purpose or value. So brahmacharya basically means that you're looking charya for Brahma, for the supreme truth, the absolute, supreme truth, which in our belief is, the supreme personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. So for that to be very powerful, you can be abstinent. Brahmacharya has different meanings. You can choose to be, not engaging sexually, and you can choose to devote more of your time and energy towards devotion, but it doesn't mean only that. For example, if you are engaging in sex within married life in a way that makes sense according to dharma, that is also considered brahmacharya. And many devotees have actually expressed that it's even more challenging and more difficult than just simply setting it aside, So similarly, when he talks about sex life in dharmic framing, we shouldn't think that it's a very easy thing in comparison to, celibacy. It's similarly difficult. It's similarly challenging, or in certain aspects even more challenging. So it's not a contradiction, because the two really serve the same purpose, which is to go deeper and deeper into our commitment to dharma, to spiritual religious principles that are uplifting. And so if you see it from that perspective, then Krishna talks about two different ways of lifting you up. One is in while you engage, and one is while you don't engage sexually, but it's both framed in a dharmic way. And that's what brahmacharya really is all about. It's brahmacharya encompasses things that are not always in celibacy as well, in that sense. Yeah.
Yes, Radhamadhav Prabhu, thank you very much. A wonderful answer to my question. Very helpful.
My pleasure. It's the mercy of my Gurudev and Radha Krishna. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Vijay Krishna. So just before we wrap it up, there's a few other great comments that have come in on Facebook, but I want to just share the website so that people can see. So this is the website that Radhamadhav was referring to. I'll let him say something about it in a moment, but it's Nectarpot, so www.nectarpot.com/eros. And do you want to say a couple of words? Obviously, lots of great resources here, but say a few words, Radhamadhav, if you would, please.
Thank you, Raviji. Yes, so this is just a landing point that can be expanded later on. It's still growing, so don't think this is the final thing. I'm also open for feedback. If you want to share something that may be of value here, I'm very much into that too. And really, it's about community sharing. So I also want to encourage those who need to have more of a community sense. They can also directly connect with me. We do have a private Facebook group as well for those who are interested on this topic of, Eros in Vaishnavism, or Eros-friendly Vaishnavas, if you want to frame it in this way. So that's just, one of the ways of reaching out to everyone out there. There is also so many more ways of doing that privately as well, and that should be very much encouraged. Also, another website that's linked here is in regards to some topic that came up a lot today during the talk. I want to also mention that shortly here in regards to how the Shramanas really create a lot of influence that is then creating that deep samskara for, or inclination for, renunciation friendliness, or renunciation centrism in our tradition. It's really an important piece of information in our history. And that's linked here, but I'm just sharing it for all of you here as well who are only hearing this in audio version. So that would be nectarpot.com/ oh, wait a second. That was published as a post. So that comes with a date. So that I don't know that by heart. But what you can do, just go to nectarpot.com/articles, and the latest article, which is called Hindu Synthesis and Our Freedom to Reform, I think. In that article, really, I go deeper into that topic of the so-called Hindu synthesis, which is the biggest synthesis in our Indian history, which is basically the synthesis of the Brahmanical and the Shramanical values that then have completely changed the face of our belief system and outlook in regards to sexuality, renunciation, family friendliness, whatever is, related to that, body friendliness or body unfriendliness. So with that, I'm, giving the microphone back to Ravi. And I want to thank also all of you for participating here. And Ravi, you are a wonderful moderator. I really very much enjoyed having you here with us. You're a great support. Thank you so much.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. I was just scrolling through the page there. I'm sure many of you could see so many amazing things are covered. A lot of what we talked about today and lots more. I can see that it's a very valuable resource. Let me just do one thing. So I just wanted to, before we fully wrap up, bring in some of these comments from Facebook, which I think were great. So Maggie Lord Madhumati says, Radhamadhav, as you've been talking, I Googled the definition of eros and I found 8 Greek words for different kinds of love, which I find very interesting. Philia, agape, eros, storge, etc. It'd be lovely to consider all these kinds of love back to being love after all. That was nice. And D. Walinda says, as a program manager, project manager, she resonates with what I said about the reports. She said, we need to do more reflection and actively learn lessons from the past, especially where we've got things wrong. There is often too much denial. Very good point. And then Danista Devidasi says, can you share the address or the web link? And actually, Dee, you see, we can see Dee is a very efficient program manager. She's already found the link and she's posted it in the chat. So well done.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So yeah, fantastic. What a really great session. Let me just, I think that was fantastic and great to get so much, involvement and questions. Really nice, and appreciate you very much, Radhamadhav, for not just doing the session, but doing the work, living this and so that you actually have so much to share. So very much appreciate that, and very much appreciate you being here and sharing that with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me today. Thank you again, Ravi, for being the most wonderful moderator. And thank you all of you for joining. You are also great inspiration for me, and keep on blessing me that I can continue to serve the Vaishnavas in a very humble way. And yes, let's continue the healing. Let's be part of the healing together, really. That's what really makes a big difference at the end of the day when it comes to these delicate topics. I wish all of us that we can be part of healing each other and supporting our healing together.
Beautiful. We're getting some heart emojis coming in. And I also just like to invite everyone listening, thank you for coming, but also just to, no doubt you'll have had some great takeaways from today, but have the courage, obviously in appropriate ways, to talk to your friends about this stuff and maybe share what you learned and see what kind of can come out of the conversations. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Raviji. Hare Krishna. Pranams to all of you.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna.